This explainer is an AI-generated summary of Dr. West's landmark lecture on the mechanics of breathing. His textbook on respiratory physiology has really been a cornerstone for generations of us in pulmonary and critical care. Dr. West also recorded a complete lecture series, which is, frankly, essential viewing. The link is right there in the description below, and you'll also find summaries of his other lectures on this channel. So please, feel free to browse them. All right, let's delve into the fundamental static properties of the lung and chest wall. Understanding these principles is absolutely critical because they dictate the work of breathing and they really form the basis for interpreting everything from pulmonary function tests to ventilator waveforms. Okay, let's begin with the respiratory pump. Now, it's a foundational concept we all learn, but it's really worth revisiting with a clinical eye. Under normal, resting conditions, inspiration is active work, while expiration is a passive process, driven entirely by stored potential energy. This distinction is absolutely key to understanding pathologies like air trapping. The diaphragm, of course, is the prime mover of inspiration. As you can see, it's innervated by the phrenic nerves, which originate from C3, 4, and 5. Now, this high cervical origin is clinically profound. It's exactly why a patient with a C7 spinal cord transection can still breathe independently. When it contracts, it pulls the central tendon down, increasing that cephalocaudal axis. Then you have the external intercostals, which lift the ribs in that classic bucket handle motion, expanding both the anterior, posterior, and lateral diameters of the thorax. So like we said, quiet expiration is passive, driven entirely by the elastic recoil of the lungs. But during states of high-minute ventilation, think exercise, or in patients with obstructive disease, expiration becomes a very active process. This is powered mainly by the abdominal wall muscles. They contract, increase intra-abdominal pressure, and forcefully drive the diaphragm's cephalad. And the internal intercostals, they aid this by actively depressing the rib cage. Okay, let's move from the pump to the lung itself and see how its intrinsic properties determine its response to the forces that are generated by those respiratory muscles. We'll start by examining its pressure-volume relationship.
This pressure-volume curve of an isolated lung reveals two critical properties. First, the relationship is nonlinear. You can see at higher lung volumes, the lung becomes much less compliant. It gets stiffer as it approaches its elastic limit. Second, it exhibits something called hysteresis. What this means is the inspiratory and expiratory paths are not the same. For any given pressure, the lung volume is actually higher during deflation than inflation. And that energy difference? It's almost entirely attributable to the effects of alveolar surface tension.
So the slope of this PV curve at any point is the lung's compliance, basically its distensibility or stretchiness. A normal value is around 200 milliliters per centimeter of water. What that means is for every 1 centimeter of water of transpulmonary pressure we generate, we should get about 200 mils of volume. This value is an absolutely critical parameter in mechanical ventilation, and it gets pathologically altered in very predictable ways by disease. And here we see the clinical extremes. In pulmonary fibrosis, all that deposition of collagen makes the lungs stiff and non-compliant. It shifts the PV curve down and to the right. It's a low-volume, high-pressure system. Conversely, in emphysema, the destruction of elastin by proteases makes the lung highly compliant. It's floppy, shifting the curve up and to the left. It inflates with almost no pressure, but it lacks the elastic recoil it needs for effective passive expiration. And that, of course, is what leads to air trapping. We've just talked about the lung's tissue elasticity, but believe it or not, a far more powerful force is at play on the alveolar surface. Surface tension. This force is generated at the air-liquid interface lining every single one of our hundreds of millions of alveoli. And this brings us to a fundamental physiological paradox. The law of Laplace, remember, pressure equals 2 times the tension divided by the radius, predicts that if surface tension were constant, the smaller alveoli would have a higher internal pressure and should just collapse into the larger ones. This would create profound instability and atelectasis. So why don't our lungs collapse? Well, the reason lies in a critical biochemical adaptation.
This classic experiment just elegantly demonstrates the power of surface tension. Look what happens when an X-sized lung is filled with saline, completely abolishing the air-liquid interface. The pressure-volume curve totally transforms. Notice how much more compliant it becomes, and how that hysteresis almost vanishes? This is the proof. The majority of the lung's elastic recoil in the work of breathing isn't about stretching elastin and collagen. It's about overcoming the surface tension at the alveolar surface.
And the solution to this problem is pulmonary surfactant. It's a phospholipid protein complex secreted by type 2 pneumocytes. The main component, DPPC, is amphiphytic, so it arranges itself at the air-liquid interface with its hydrophobic tails facing the air. Now here's the key. As the alveolus shrinks during exhalation,
These molecules get packed more and more tightly, which dramatically lowers the surface tension. This is the property that counteracts Laplace's law and keeps the lungs stable.
So surfactant serves three absolutely critical functions. One, it increases compliance, which makes the work of breathing manageable. Two, it stabilizes alveoli of different sizes, preventing atelectasis. And three, it helps keep the alveoli dry. The catastrophic consequence of its absence is seen so clearly in premature infants with infant respiratory distress syndrome. All right, now that we understand the lungs' pressure-volume properties, we can explore a fascinating consequence of that. Ventilation is not uniform. In an upright person, gravity plays a major role in how gas gets distributed throughout the lungs. Because of its own weight, the lung essentially hangs in the chest cavity. And this creates a vertical gradient in pleural pressure. It's more negative at the apex and less negative at the base. What this means is that at FRC, the basal alveoli are less expanded. They're sitting lower on their PV curve. And as you can see, this is a much steeper, more compliant region. Therefore, during inspiration, for the same change in pleural pressure, the base expands more and receives the majority of the ventilation. The apices, on the other hand, are already highly stretched and sitting on the flatter, less compliant part of the curve. Finally, let's put this all together and really understand how the lung interacts with the chest wall to establish the resting volume of the entire respiratory system. This all comes down to a balance of opposing forces. Just think of the lung as a stretched, elastic structure. Because of its elastic fibers and all that surface tension, it constantly wants to recoil inward to a smaller, unstressed volume. And in direct opposition to that, you have the chest wall. At typical lung volumes, it acts like a compressed spring that wants to expand outwards. Functional residual capacity, or FRC, is the critical equilibrium point of the respiratory system. As shown here, at this very specific volume, the inward elastic recoil of the lung, which generates a positive pressure, is perfectly matched and opposed by the outward spring of the chest wall, which generates a negative pressure. The two forces cancel each other out, and the net pressure across the total system is zero. This is the volume the system naturally returns to after a passive exhalation. So, FRC is the starting point for every single tidal breath. But more importantly, it functions as the oxygen reservoir that buffers the blood against the cyclical nature of breathing. This is what allows for continuous gas exchange at the alveolar capillary membrane, even during expiration. So, to summarize, the static mechanics of breathing are governed by this really elegant interplay between the muscular pump, the intrinsic compliance of the lung tissue, the physics of surface tension overcome by surfactant, and of course the opposing elastic forces of the lung and chest wall that establish our resting lung volume, FRC. You see, these static properties are the very foundation upon which the dynamics of airflow are built. So the next logical question is, how do alterations in these properties, things like compliance and recoil, lead to the pathophysiology of obstructive and restrictive lung diseases? Thank you for your time. I hope you found this useful. Medicine is filled with long-standing assumptions, and progress really begins by questioning them. Treat all sources with a healthy skepticism, and please take the time to review Dr. West's book on respiratory physiology.